Gonna make kind of a different video today. I get a lot of comments on asking me about my job because I think I mentioned somewhere I flew a helicopter. Been making nothing but 50 videos. Man, it feels good to be back on this 150. This thing is nice. I get questions about that. I figured, you know what? I'm gonna take my Mad Dog to work. Go see my job and check it out. And I have probably one of the best jobs in the world. And it's rewarding too. The people I see in my job, they're probably having the worst day of their life. If you can make that day just a little bit better, that's a good thing. Company rules prevent me from showing any logos or names or branding on social media, so I have to figure out how to blur this stuff out. Looks like they're about ready to go on a flight. Are you on standby? What are you on standby for?
For a semi versus dump truck. 70 in State Road.
Okay, so down 621, probably 9-mile grade. This is the back. It's like a miniature ER and ICU all in one. These guys are the SEAL Team 6 of medicine right here. The real deal. They can do stuff doctors can't do in rural areas. That's a fact. Here's my office. This is Carl's office now. Garmin 1000s. Circuit breaker switches. Pilots work 12-hour shifts. Carl will be like the day pilot, then I'm coming at night. He's on standby now to go flying. So if he goes, he's gonna work past his shift. The med crew works 24-hour shifts. So we have sleeping quarters and stuff upstairs. And we have a fairly big maintenance hangar. This is where we work on the aircraft. Part 135 aviation requires a lot of maintenance. Helicopters require a lot of maintenance. A lot goes on to keep these things flying. We're not rebuilding engines or rebuilding transmissions in a shop like this. It's all pulled out, it's sent off, it's rebuilt, comes back, we bolt it in. They have a mechanic for the aircraft and then a staff of mechanics that also work in the hangar. It's like a firehouse. We have a base here, workout area, got the practice dummies, tons of drugs, tons of things like that, all medical stuff. The pilot area in here, the offices, so we plan our flights. Night vision goggles, these are pretty cool. There's some video looking through the NVGs. The FAA approves these things for us. They're really not supposed to be something you would use in civilian aviation. Only the military has these, but we get approval from the FAA. I think you can see how much better you can see. So with the night vision goggles, you can see these buildings and these trees, everything good. Without it, of course, it goes black. You can't see a damn thing. And in the movies, they always show the light blinding you. Here's the big spotlight on the helicopter. You can see it doesn't blind you. It barely even affects you. So yeah, lights don't affect it. You can look at this big light here on this hangar. It doesn't even affect it. If it gets bright enough that the light annoys you, because now it's light enough you don't need them. Same ones used in the military. They're ANVA's 9s, I think now. They're all about the same. At the kitchen area, just like a firehouse. Bedrooms back there for the crew. Their flight was canceled, so now I'm the oncoming pilot. I'd pull the duty from here on out. Now, I know all you guys that watch my channel are gearheads, so we're gonna get into how this thing works. That's kind of what I wanted to show you. I got sidetracked there with a bunch of stuff. As you're sitting in the seat, you have a lever over here that goes up and down. That's called a collective. On an airplane, you'd call it a throttle maybe, but here it's a collective, and we'll get into why that is in a minute. It does have a throttle grip on it, and that throttle can be moved, and it moves the opposite way of a motorcycle, so it gets kind of confusing if you ride motorcycles and fly helicopters. On the feet, typically you would call rudder pedals, but on a helicopter they're called anti-torque pedals. This here is your stick, but in a helicopter we're going to call it a cyclic, and it moves always just like a joystick would, but it's called a cyclic here, and we'll get into why. Everything we're going to do on the helicopter to make it move and manipulate where it goes is done with changes of pitch on these blades. This is the rotor head. These things are pitch links. These move up and down and move these bell crank. These move the blade up and down in the front and change pitch. The rotor blade is an aerodynamic airfoil, just like a wing of an airplane. In this example, it's going to the right. It's spinning this way. So as the blade spins and comes by, air goes over the top of the blade and air goes over the bottom of the blade. You can see the top of the blade is raised, and that airfoil shape makes the air on top of the blade have to go a further distance than the air on the bottom of the blade, and then the air will meet up back here. So think of the same piece of air going a further distance up here than it does down here. When those air molecules separate, it creates a lift, and that's how an airfoil creates a lift. It's an area of low pressure or vacuum on top of the blade, and it pulls the blade up into that area of low pressure, and that's your lift. Now you can increase lift by spinning the blade faster, but we're already going about 400 miles an hour on this blade. And then the other way to increase lift is to twist this blade. You twist the front of it up, and it makes this distance even longer. Now that distance got longer over the top because you move this up and you left the back down. So that twisting motion in the blade is called pitch, and we've increased the pitch to increase lift. And how do we control that? We control the pitch with these pitch links. They go up and down and change the pitch of those blades. This whole thing is spinning around. Now watch what happens. These pitch links also spin around. Everything is spinning around. The whole rotor system spins around. And yet I'm controlling these blades with these pitch links with my flight controls, because it's spinning around on what we call a swash plate. This piece right here. That's a swash plate, and all those pitch links are hooked to it. But below that swash plate's another swash plate. Look at this one right here. That swash plate is stationary, it's not moving. That's the one that hooks to my flight controls, and there's the controls. They go down there and hook to the flight controls. You can see that stationary and moving swash plate. One stationary and one moves. That stationary one I can control with my flight controls. If I lift up on my stationary swash plate, I'm going to increase pitch on all these pitch links as it's spinning around in a circle. That increase in pitch, they're all happening at the same time. That's a collective movement. I'm collectively increasing all these pitches. That's where it gets the name collective for that stick on the left that I pull up and down. I'm going to increase pitch or decrease pitch collectively. If I want to go forward, let's say, then I've got to increase the pitch on the rear and decrease the pitch on the front of the. When I do that, this whole tip path plane, this whole rotor disc will tilt forward. It's tilting forward because it has less lift in the front and more lift in the rear. And that's gonna make the helicopter go forward. I can do that to the side, I can do that rearward, I can do it anyway. And I do that by cyclic inputs. That stationary swash plate in here, I can tilt that swash plate. So every time this spins around on that tilt, it's gonna increase pitch in the back and decrease pitch in the front. That's a cyclic input. It happens once every time it goes around, cyclically. This rotor system has so much inertia. Look how big it is. It's 34 feet across, and the engine has so much power. You know, 675 horsepower. It's a lot of power in a little motor like that. And it turns these blades. And that turning motion creates a lot of torque. So much torque, in fact, that it wants to spin this helicopter in the opposite direction. We put this thing on here, this anti-torque device, called the tail rotor. When I pull up on that collective and increase pitch on all these blades, it creates a whole lot of drag. And because it's creating drag, the idea is to keep these blades spinning fast so you don't fall out of the sky. You gotta add a lot of fuel. So it's like giving it the gas uphill. And when that torque happens, the blades are spinning this way, the whole helicopter tries to spin the opposite way. That means the nose will come right because the blades are turning counterclockwise. This tail rotor blade, there's that airfoil shape, same thing. Bigger here, littler here. Air comes in like this, air splits across it, and it meets again on the back. The air has to get thinner right here to make that happen. To meet this air in the back, it has to thin out. Creates a low pressure, a vacuum, that's called lift. So we created a lift, and it brings the tail this way. It pushes the nose left. So when I add a whole lot of power and the nose tries to come right because of the torque on that main rotor, I push some of this pedal and it's gonna make me go nose left, and it's gonna counteract that torque. That's why we call them anti-torque pedals. Now here's the other helicopter. It's a bit more modern. It's got a finestron tail. Same principle, it's an anti-torque system, but it uses this kind of wacky looking tail. It's a lot safer. You knock your tail boom off or you knock your tail rotor off, things are gonna go bad in a hurry. You're gonna spin around like crazy. The nice thing about this is it's pretty well protected in here. So for guys that are getting into tight places like trees, near buildings, it gives you a lot of protection. You know, obviously it would still be a disaster if you hit something with this, but it wouldn't lead to your death. This is a bit bigger inside. The patient goes in the back. They roll in on a little stretcher. It's got this kind of cockpit here. Same thing. You've got your collective, your cyclic, and of course your anti-torque pedals. This one's got controls on both sides. The back's much roomier for carrying the patient, and this one's stripped of the stuff right. This was coming in for maintenance, so it doesn't have all the medical gear in it right now. Yeah, this helicopter cost about $8 million. The little one over there that we just saw cost about $5.5 million. So yeah, these things are pretty darn expensive, and they cost a lot to maintain. And this is the EC135. The other one was the Bell 407. That's a smaller one. And it's the same principle. You can see the little control links going up to the stationary swash plate, then the spinning swash plates on top of that. This is the transmission of the bigger one inside here. Takes up a lot of room. Here's kind of a different view of those swash plates. This is a spinning one, and this down here is a stationary one. There's a gimbal bearing that allows it to turn and twist and go up and down. And the pitch links to go up to the rotor blades and change the pitch. See, this one spins on top. This mast, we call it, this thing right here, like on a sailboat, a mast, is spinning all this stuff around. It goes down into the transmission. And yes, if you look on top, right up there, there is something called a Jesus nut, and it's that big nut. And that thing gets tightened pretty darn tight. So there is a Jesus nut. And the mast is held into the transmission right down here by 12 bolts. We call those the 12 apostles. That big box here, that's your transmission. Transmission fluid. This, you can see a shaft coming into the transmission. This shaft is driving the transmission and spinning it around. Just like the rear end in your Mad Dog, this is turning that movement this way into movement upwards. 90-degree gearbox is basically what it is, a big one, and it's driving that rotor system. So behind the transmission we have the engine, and there's not much to the engine. Here's your starter on this side. This is actually an accessory drive unit that drives accessories like the generator, things like that. The tail rotor drive shaft, there it goes out there. The engine is just right up here. This is the exhaust. It's piped around and comes out here. The engine all fits right in here. This is a 675 horsepower engine, and it probably weighs 90 pounds at best. Let's look at the other side. We're gonna compress air and we're gonna blow it up with fire. That's all we're gonna do. Up inside here is a compressor. It looks like a turbine. So it's a jet engine. So it's burning jet A, like on a turboprop or a jet airplane. We're gonna compress the air. We're gonna get the air into the combustion chamber. And it comes through the rest of the compressor stages up in here. In the combustion chamber, we're gonna release that air mixed with fuel. So we've got fuel nozzles, and this one just has one big fuel nozzle going in the rear. Sprays fuel into here, and then it's released into the burner, we call it. Now look how thin this is. This thing's running at, 500-600 degrees Celsius. It would burn right through this metal. There's a layer of air. The flame is very controlled inside this thing. It makes a layer of air that protects it from burning through. The hot gases expand and they accelerate and then escape. And they escape through these tunnels. There's one on each side. As they escape through here, they're routed back up into here and they turn another turbine. And then they're exhausted out the top here. When it turns this turbine, it spins this compressor. So the turbine turning spins the compressor that compresses the air, mixes it with the fuel in here, explodes it, and keeps turning this turbine. So to start it, we hit the starter, get this thing spinning. We can't spin it with hot gases because we're not on fire yet. So we spin it mechanically with a starter, and then once it's spinning high enough, we throw some fuel in there and we ignite it with the spark plug. And once that ignition happens, you can turn those spark plugs off. You don't need them anymore. They're just there to start the fire. It's called an igniter box. Let the flame just sustain itself. You just keep pumping fuel into it. And now it's a self-sustaining engine. It's one of the most reliable engines out there. Again, this is all gearbox here. It drives components, pumps, filters, things like that. You have to have hydraulic pumps that, work your flight controls. Now the little one had a Rolls-Royce engine in it. This one's got a Pratt & Whitney. They look a lot like the Lycomings. There's your starter, turns the gearbox. And here's where the high-speed shaft goes into the transmission to drive that. There's two engines. There's an identical engine on the other side. So this is just one of two engines. This is the can where you get the burn. The compressor is all tucked away inside there. That's where your air goes in the compressor. Fuel nozzles spray fuel, and your exhaust goes straight out on this one. So the turbine is inside here that spins the compressor. Shaft that the turbine on and the compressor on, they're on the same shaft. And here's that tail rotor drive shaft going back to the rear, and it gets all the way back and it drives a tail rotor blade. But that's a good primer on how a helicopter works. It's just a quick, I could go on and on about this thing all day. There's so much stuff, obviously. A quick how-to, these things work. Introduction to my job. The helicopter has a video camera in it right here. Everything in here is recorded. We're being monitored the entire time we fly. This is a good thing. This is not a Big Brother thing. It's all in the name of safety. And we have help on the ground as we fly. If we need something, we ask for it, we get it. We get the best of the best in this job. We get the best of the best from air traffic control, from the FAA, from everyone. And they're all here to support. Yeah, we're not allowed to film and fly. That's a big no-no, and they'll know if we do it. I actually brought this one down for maintenance.
Your breaker that's pulled right now.
This is
battery, so battery comes. So here's your warning, so you go forward with it.
all right.
Good to go. Silence that alarm. And then you should have your fire.
And prime's on. All right, timer, TOT, number 1.
Yep, number
idle.
1, come to idle. Yep. Doing the test. We're going to test the autopilot, so everything will come off there.
I just landed, got back in the nick of time. There's a big old storm coming, and it's about to hit us. We're gonna pull it in the hangar and work on it. Well, I'm not gonna work on it. I'm not allowed to touch this thing. But these mechanics are gonna work on it. Had to fly this one just for a pre-maintenance flight to check some numbers. So that worked out pretty good. Now we're gonna put it in the hangar. So now we got it all in the hangar. They can begin work. While this is being worked on, this will still be in service out here to take any flights that come up. Something I forgot to mention is these rotor blades. Now you'll see these rotor blades, they're pretty floppy, it seems like. They kind of bounce around, and metal rotor blades are a thing of the past. That's like, it takes you back to the 1960s. Rotor blades today are fiberglass, maybe carbon fiber, and other composites. When they say composites in aviation, they mean plastic. Plastic's pretty good material, but it sounds cheap, so they don't like to use it, so they'll call it composites. If you just hook some hooks onto these blades and try to lift this helicopter, you just snap these blades in half. These blades are not strong enough to lift this helicopter. The helicopter weighs anywhere from 5,000 pounds to about 8,000 pounds. What gives these blades strength is the spinning motion, the centrifugal force. Just like think about your weed whacker when you're chopping weeds. That little blade on your weed whacker, that piece of string, has no strength at all. But when it's spinning around, it'll cut a twig down. So yeah, these blades get their strength from spinning around, and they will cut a tree down. Damage it, of course. But that's why they seem so floppy when they're sitting here. They get much stronger once you're going. And when I mentioned the 400 miles an hour, I was talking about the blades. That's how fast the blades are spinning around. It takes about 400 miles an hour to get enough lift, and they stay at 400 miles an hour. The speed limiting factor on a helicopter is that blade rotation. So as the helicopter goes forward, this blade that's called the advancing blade over here as it spins around is going forward. The retreating blade is the one coming back here and going to the rear of the helicopter. So this advancing blade is going the 400 miles an hour plus your helicopter speed. So let's say this helicopter is going 100 miles an hour. So now the advancing blade's going 500 miles an hour. The retreating blade is going 300 miles an hour. Because the helicopter is going through the air, the same air it's getting lift on the blades from at 100 miles an hour, it's actually flying through the air this way as the blade's going back this way at the same time. So that retreating blade loses that 100 miles an hour. If this helicopter could go 200 miles an hour, it would slow that blade down to a relative speed of 200 miles an hour. And 200 miles an hour is not fast enough to fly this helicopter. That blade would stall, and the helicopter would lose lift on the left side and it would roll over. That's called retreating blade stall. Retreating blade stall is the biggest limiting factor in how fast we can go in a helicopter, and that speed's usually around 150. And here's rotor blades from the EC135 pulled off while they work on the rotor head. You see, real smooth, all composite. Pretty fancy, cost around $400,000 each. And that's my cool job in a nutshell. It is humane to take care of each other. It's what makes us human.